Please be seated. The court is now in session. Today we will continue to hear the testimony of the witness Sum Alat. And before we hand the floor to the prosecution, I'd like to get confirmation from Kiew Sampan's defense regarding the Chamber's query yesterday so that we can prepare the schedule for next week. Could you please give us your confirmation?
Yes, Mr. President, I have already conveyed our position, our response to the court officer. We shall use the half-day that the trial chamber has allocated for us.
Thank you very much for your confirmation. The chamber would like now to give the floor to the prosecution to continue putting questions to this witness. You may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. Good morning, Counsel. And good morning, Mr. Sum. Today I'd like to ask you a few questions about your role in the conflict between 1970 and 1975 in Cambodia. And you gave a brief overview to your to the investigators from the ECC a number of years ago. And if I can just quote you that and ask you some questions about what you said to them. At E00242123, Khmer 00196809, and at French 00274129, in your statement you said this. When asked the question, what did you do before 1975? Where did you live? I finished my education in 1972 and I joined the infantry of Pasat Provincial Subdivision in the same year. At that time, I was a lower rank officer as Corporal 1 Strike. I worked at a provincial staff office. I participated in the battlefield in Phnom Kravan district. It was the heaviest battlefield in 1973. Then we moved our base and took thousands of residents in Leech, area of Kravan district, to Pasat province. In 1973, I worked in the provincial staff again, and in April 1975, my commander sent me to work in the mortar unit at Svay Dun Keo Bridge battlefield. I returned to Pasat provincial town when the Khmer Rouge took control over the province. My first question is it correct that you were 16 when the war started in Cambodia and 21 years old when the Khmer Rouge took over Pasat province?
The age that you refer to is incorrect.
Thank you. So in 1970, how old were you?
In 1970, I was about 19 or 20 years old. because I already passed my exam.
Thank you. When you joined the infantry in 1972, did you belong to a particular company or battalion or unit?
When I joined the army, on the Lon Nol side, it was the provincial subdivision, and in French I was called État-major of the province, and it was located in the provincial town office.
And when you were not in the battlefield, what was the particular job you did for the military then?
I was an État-major staff at the provincial staff office, because there was the first office, second office, and the third office, and I was a staff as part of the operational office.
So you had a good overview of what was happening militarily in Passat province during that time that you were working in the office? For example, where the front lines were, what military activity was occurring, and where military units were based.
During the times that I worked at the Chief of Staff office, the situation was rather confusing. Some sectors had been controlled by the Khmer Rouge, and there had been battlefields in various locations.
You mentioned in 1973 the Phnom Kravan district was the heaviest battlefield. About how far was that battlefield from the Passat provincial town?
The location of the Phnom Kravan was previously known as the Liech district. It was more than 30 kilometers away from the Busa provincial town, and all the people had been sent to live in the Busa provincial town in 1973.
And who sent them to live in that town? Was it the Lon Nol forces, or was it the revolutionary forces? Who made them move?
There was an order from the upper level, that is on the Lon Nol military side.
And was that because you were losing the battle in that area?
I could not know the real reason, but I only knew that the order came from the upper level from Phnom Penh.
Thank you. And between 1973 and 1975 in Passat, were there many battlefields throughout the province?
The events that occurred in Posat province at that time was the gradual withdrawal or retreat from the Krawang district, and also those from Kroko district was also withdrawn until the day of the 17th April when it ceased.
And are you able to say, before the 17th of April, say before the Khmer Rouge took control over the province, about how many front lines were there? What length were the front lines? What length were the battles?
At that time, the town front line was extended to about 30 kilometers from the provincial town.
Did the front line surround this 30-kilometre distance? Did that front line surround the town with Khmer Rouge forces, or was it only on one side or two sides or three sides of Pasat?
Please repeat your question.
You said before the Khmer Rouge took power in Pasat province that the front line was about 30 kilometres away from the provincial town. Did that front line circle Pasat provincial town, or was the front line just to the north or the south or the east or the west, or both or some of that?
There were battlefields at various districts, and also there were battlefields surrounding the provincial town. The Khmer Rouge gradually approached the town, and there had been battlefields. So people had been evacuated, but the battlefields did not rage only within the provincial town, but it also happened at various other districts in the province.
Is it fair to say then that shortly before Pasat was taken over by the Khmer Rouge, the municipality, there were many battlefields being fought in the province?
At that time, there had been no more battlefields after the Khmer Rouge took control of the provincial town, because by that time the soldiers were disarmed or surrendered.
Yes, but shortly before the Khmer Rouge took control of the province, was there a lot of fighting in different battlefields in the municipality before they took control?
Yes, indeed. immediately before the Khmer Rouge took control, there had been fierce fightings in various battles.
Thank you. I'd now like to ask you a few questions about this event where you were required to disarm. And you talk about that in your statement. And if I read that portion of the statement to you, I would like to ask you a few questions about what you said to the ECC investigators. This is at English 0024 2123 to 24, Khmer 0019 to 6809, and French 0027 4129. You were asked this question: what did you do on the 17th of April 1975? Where did you live? In April 1975, I was removed from the mortar unit to Pasat provincial town. At that time, the Khmer Rouge took control over Pasat province. The Lon Nol's army in Pasat province received an instruction from Phnom Penh to disarm from May Shawn, Brigadier General, through an announcement on radio. When we disarmed, the Khmer Rouge continued to fire and spray towards us from both sides of the national road. The Khmer Rouge troops who fired towards us were those hidden in the jungle. They fired and sprayed at any direction to either human or animal target. I spent one day to walk from Svay Dang Keo to Trapang Chon in Bakan district. Did all of the Lon Nol units in Pasat, in the province, to your knowledge, have access to military radios?
I don't quite get your question. Please repeat.
You mentioned that the instruction to disarm from Phnom Penh came through in an announcement on the radio. Was that a publicly available radio, or was that just a radio only available to the Lon Nol forces?
The radio announcements was made nationally. It was a national event and it was a national broadcast. It announced that we, representing the General Staff of Phnom Penh, May Si Chon, wishes to make the announcement to all the army to surrender by raising the white flag and to lay down arms. All units must abide by this instruction.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that announcement?
I clearly recall that I was in Svay Don Keo, where my unit was based.
And just so we know, Svay Dang Keo, is that how far away is that from the town of Pasat, and in which direction?
Svay Don Keo is the border of Posat and Battambong. It was situated along National Road number 5. It was to the west of the provincial town, and it was about 30 kilometers away from the provincial town.
Thank you. That was a very clear answer. You talked about disarming, and then the Khmer Rouge continued to fire indiscriminately at you. Were the Khmer Rouge forces aware that you had disarmed at that stage?
President, a witness, please wait. Counsel Victor Coupe, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I object to this question. The witness cannot possibly know what the Khmer Rouge was knowing at that time. So it's an invitation to speculate.
Your Honour, they might. I mean, this witness might talk about waving of surrender flags. I don't know. I'm not asking to speculate. He was in the battlefield at the time, and he may give us some information that would lead us to believe that he did know. And just because it's not in his statement, it doesn't mean he's speculating. He was in a position to know they had disarmed, and he may be able to tell us whether they knew. And by their actions, and by the Khmer Rouge's actions, we may know. It's not speculation. He was in the place where the disarming occurred. He was in the place where the Khmer Rouge were.
President, the objection and its ground is invalid, thus overruled. We need to hear the response by the witness to the last question put to him by the prosecutor. Witness, please respond to the last question. Mr. President, I would like to consult with my duty counsel. President, Mr. Witness, this question does not incriminate you, and if you cannot recall the question, you may ask the question to be repeated. And the prosecution, maybe the witness cannot recall the last question, so please put the question to him again.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll rephrase it. When your unit heard the announcement to disarm on the radio, did you communicate that to the Khmer Rouge forces that were firing at you? Did you let them know that you were disarming?
On this matter, when the announcement on the radio for us to disarm, and in the evening we were facing the Khmer Rouge force. In fact, we let down our arm in the evening, and then we joined in the dancing event together, but by next morning the thing was completely different, because by the morning they armed themselves and we raised our white flag.
And when you raised your white flag, did the shooting continue or did it stop?
When we raised the white flag, as I said, in the evening there was a ceasefire, but in the early morning when we walked while raising the white flag from Don Cao district to Posat, the situation was completely different from the night event.
And was there any firing in the morning?
While we were retreating together with the civilians along National Road number 5, we were fired upon from both sides of the road.
Thank you. I would now like to take you back to your statement where you state that you attended a meeting at the Bakan District Office, and it's at English 0024 2124, Khmer 0019 6809 and 10, and French 0027 4130. You state that at 7 p.m. of the same day, and that's of the day that you disarmed, the Khmer Rouge troops rounded up about 500 soldiers, residents and civil servants for a meeting at the Bakan district office. I did not know the name of the Khmer Rouge chief who presided over that meeting. At that time, I replaced my army uniform with a civilian suit. The content of that meeting was political indoctrination, urging the residents to leave the provincial town and go to rural areas by saying that such evacuation was to avoid a bombardment by the United States of America. I fled during their meeting with a pistol and spent one night to crawl to Svay At. I sneaked in and joined the mobile brigade to dig a canal at Kabal Hong. My first question is, how far is the Bakan district office to the centre of Pasat, the central town?
Response. Bakan is to the west of the district office. I think it's about 20 kilometers away from this office.
Are you saying the Bakan district office is 20 kilometres away from the Pasat town?
Response. Yes.
How did the Khmer Rouge round up the 500 soldiers, residents and civil servants?
Response. I don't know the procedures in rounding up these people, because by the time I was there, these people had already been gathered, and I was also stopped to join them.
And can you explain why you headed towards the Bakan district office after the disarming?
Response. On the same day, as I already mentioned in my statement, we left Svay Don Cao, and it took us 1 day before we reached Bakan. And at night, by the time we arrived, the meeting had already been convened. And we were fired and because of this, we had to spend a whole day traveling from Swai Don Kao to Bakan.
Can you explain a bit in more detail what was said at the meeting? You said that the content of the meeting was political indoctrination and urging the residents to leave the provincial town. Can you explain more what they said to you?
Response. I did not pay great attention to the event because I was already in fear. I was terrified and I was running for my life.
You said that they urged the residents to leave. Did they order people to leave, or was it an invitation?
Response. It was not an invitation, I can say. It was more or less an order, and people had to leave.
And do you know which Khmer Rouge officials were conducting the meeting? Who was speaking?
Response. I'm afraid I don't know who chaired the meeting.
After this meeting where people were asked to leave Pasat town, did people leave Pasat, the town centre of Pasat?
Response. I'm talking about Bakan as meeting, the meeting at Bakan district, not the one at the provincial town of Posat.
Are you aware if there were many meetings occurring in Pasat province of a similar nature where people were being asked to leave the area or to leave the provincial town? If you're not, just say so.
Response. No, I'm not. I only am aware of the meeting in Bakan district. I am not aware of any other meetings conducted elsewhere.
I'd now like to talk about the evacuation of Pasat town. In your statement at English 0024 2124 to 25, Khmer 0019 6810, and French 0027 4130, you were asked this question: how was the situation in Pasat province when the Khmer Rouge troops took control over the entire province after the 17th of April 1975? You answered, when the Khmer Rouge arrived, I saw the following confusing events and incidents. Khmer Rouge troops evacuated people from the provincial town to the countryside. So my first question is, how long after the meeting in Bakan district did you see people being evacuated from the provincial town of Pasat?
Response. When it comes to that period of time, I left Bakan for Swayat. It took me the whole day. The atmosphere was rather quiet and calm. I already wrote it down. Nonetheless, some confusing events still existed because people appeared to be of mixed feelings, and that evacuation had already been underway. So the period of time would be just one day different, I may say, because by the time I reached Posat, when I had left Bakan, Posat town was quiet.
When you say the town was quiet, had people left the town at that stage?
Response. I presume they had already left, because this event was also common like what had happened previously, because people had to leave their place for fear of bombs being dropped by the United States of America.
And where did these people go, the people from Pasat town?
Response. I don't know where they had gone, because people had gone to different directions. And the only thing I remember precisely is that by the time I reached Posat, the town was emptied, and that people had left. But Posat is not a big town, so people could have been sent to just some area in the neighborhood.
Thank you. I'd now like to turn to another meeting that you refer to in your statement, which was held in the Pasat Provincial Town Hall on about the 24th or 25th of April 1975. In your statement at English 0024 2125 to 6, Khmer 0019 6811, and French 0027 4132 31 and 32. Sorry. You were asked this question: after taking full control over the province after the 17th of April 1975, what did they do to Lon Nol soldiers and civil servants? At that time, Soth, Sector Secretary, called General Prum Luhun, the Pasat Provincial Governor, soldiers, civil servants and students of Lon Nol's regime to meet at the provincial office. There were about 500 attendees, and it was held at about 2 p.m. on the 24th or 25th of April 1975. The content of the meeting was an invitation to receive the Yankar at Tulpotre. There were Khmer Rouge soldiers guarding outside during the meeting, Khmer Rouge chiefs, including Ta Sot, who was also attending. My first question is, how did Ta Sot, the sector secretary, How did he contact General Prum Luhun to advise them of the meeting? Do you know how that came about?
Response. Things had already been underway, and I am not aware of how the communication was channeled. Again, how people communicated, I don't know.
That's understandable. How did you know about the meeting? Do you remember?
Response. On my side, the Lonol side, there were people who still could communicate. I mean, there was line of communication, and we talked to one another to come to a meeting at the provincial hall. I just followed them, but I just did not know how they communicated with the other side so that we could gather at that meeting all together.
I understand. And that line of communication between the Lon Nol soldiers, are you aware whether that line of communication existed throughout the province, or was it limited to certain areas and units?
Response. This line of communication on the Lonol administrative part, it was still in place. So they still had this line of communication operational, so that people could still talk to one another to go to the provincial hall.
And in terms of what was being told to the Lon Nol soldiers about the meeting, do you know whether that communication was for all Lon Nol soldiers throughout the province, or throughout particular districts, or to particular units? Was it limited to a group, or was that invitation to the meeting a broad one to all Lon Nol soldiers in the region?
Response. The invitation was sent to the people across or throughout the province.
Thank you. You mentioned that there were about 500 attendees, and you stated that some were soldiers, civil servants and students of the Lon Nol regime. Can you tell us how many of that 500 were Lon Nol soldiers, approximately?
Response. The majority of them were the former Lon Nol officials. And please note that Prum Li Hun was the governor, provincial governor, and at the same time he was also the soldier. So his subordinates still had to follow his instruction, and I feel that these people still followed such instruction seriously. And also there were some students and also teachers who were part of these 500 people.
Okay, just to be clear, in your statement you said there were soldiers, civil servants and students attending, and then you've just testified that the majority were Lon Nol officials who were subordinate to General Prum Lihun. So my question is, when you say that they were Lon Nol officials, the majority, are you saying they were majority Lon Nol soldiers or majority Lon Nol other type of official? Just so we're clear.
Response. I am talking about the mixture of people, including civilians and soldiers.
And just to finally clarify, of that 500, are you able to estimate about how many were soldiers, Lon Nol soldiers?
Response. According to my estimation, there were more than 200 Lon Nol soldiers.
You mentioned that you worked in the provincial office of the military in Passat. Did you know any of these 200 soldiers, or approximately 200 soldiers that were at that meeting?
Response. I knew a lot of them.
And were the soldiers wearing uniforms or not?
Response. On the 17th of April, when everyone was disarmed, we were no longer wearing the uniforms.
Can you approximately say, of the 200 soldiers you believe were there, about how many you knew, either closely or as an acquaintance? Just an approximate.
Response. I still recall the senior chiefs of soldiers, including the generals and other second-ranking officials from the general ranks, and I knew fairly a lot of them, at least 10 to 20 of them.
Thank you. And to be clear, did these soldiers, the ones that were at the meeting, did they come from different units, different military units, or did they come from one military unit or a couple within the Lon Nol army?
Response. These soldiers were from different military units throughout the country. They were all collected from these various parts of the country.
And when you say country, do you mean various parts of the province, or an area greater than that, or do you mean the whole country?
Response. No, I think I am referring only to the people who were gathered from throughout the province of Posat.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Within the 500 people, were there any women?
Response. I saw mainly men in the meeting, no women.
You mentioned that Khmer Rouge soldiers were guarding outside of the meeting. About how many Khmer Rouge soldiers were doing that?
Response. As I guess there could be 50 to 60 people.
And you also mentioned that there were Khmer Rouge chiefs at the meeting, one of them being Ta Sot, the sector secretary. How did you know that the others were Khmer Rouge chiefs that attended the meeting?
Response. It was not difficult to identify them because they were wearing black uniforms and they were armed, and on our side no one was armed.
About how many Khmer Rouge chiefs were there? You refer to your statement, you use the term there were Khmer Rouge chiefs. About how many chiefs were there?
Response. There were about 5 to 7 top leaders of the Khmer Rouge, and I only recognize a person by the name of Ta Sot, who was also the secretary of the sector.
And the provincial office that you met at, is that still standing today, the structure in Pasat?
Response. Yes, it is. The whole complex remains intact.
And can you briefly describe it? Was it 1 or 2 stories? Did it have a fence around it? Can you briefly explain what it looked like?
Response. During the meeting, the provincial hall was still small, but now the building was expanded, or is expanded, and the complex is now bigger, but the Grand Hotel is still the same as it used to be, but the other military complex for the General Chief of Staff has already been removed. And now the other building is housing the land management department.
Thank you. You mentioned that 500 attended. Could all of the 500 fit in the provincial building, or were some spilling out outside as well?
Response. Not all the 500 people were fit into the whole complex. Some of them were seen outside because there are too many people to fit in one place at the same time.
How long did the meeting last before the attendees left?
Response. The meeting took for about 2 to 3 hours before an agreement was reached and that everyone had to meet again the following day so that they could be sent all together to see Angkar. So the meeting was convened, and then the following day they were loaded onto trucks to receive Angkar or to meet Angkar.
Can you describe a bit more the content of the meeting? You said that it occurred for 2 to 3 hours, and you've said to the investigators that the content of the meeting was an invitation to receive the Angkor at Tulpo Tray. What was discussed in those 2 to 3 hours?
In the meeting, they educated us about the policy of reconciliation and about country building, and lastly, they spoke about placing our trust in going for the reception. That was their approach, so that we would trust them. In general, we did not know what's going to happen in the near future, but we all agreed to go for the reception.
And who was the reception to be with? And again, where was the location of that reception? You said it was at Tulpo Tray. Where was Tulpo Tray in relation to the provincial hall? About how far away was it?
Tulpo Tray was about 20 kilometers away. It was toward the Kondiang district.
And can you give some more detail about what was going to happen at Tulpo Tray, what you were told was going to happen?
When we were gathered to go to Tulpo Tray, that is in the reception of Angkar, I personally agreed to go through, but then the car that I traveled on was stopped halfway. So, in fact, I wanted to go on that car, but because it was fully loaded, I was told to go in a later vehicle. So I myself did not reach Tulpo Tray. However, 3 days later, I heard that those people had been killed.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened to you and how you found out that people were killed at Tulpo Tray. But perhaps if we can just go a little bit slower and so we can understand a little more. When you were at the meeting, you were told that there was an invitation to receive Angkor at Tulpo Tray. Who did you think Angkor was when you heard that?
Thank you for that question. To recollect the event in terms of Angkar, we never heard of Angkar while we worked for the administrative side. So we were told that we would go and greet Angkar, and we wanted to meet Angkar because we hoped that after we reconcile with one another, then we would gather our strength to build the country. But I never knew who Angkar was.
Did you think Angkar was a person or a group of people?
In fact, I did not understand who Angkar was. For that reason, I wanted to go with them in order to see who Angkar was.
As a Lon Nol soldier who was fighting with the Khmer Rouge troops, were you in fear at that time when you attended the meeting, or were you feeling optimistic that things would improve, security would improve, and peace would come to Pasat? How were you feeling when you attended that meeting and you heard this discussion about an invitation for reconciliation and meeting Angkar?
In fact, it was the feeling of being fed up of engaging in the war. The only thing that we wanted at the time was peace. So at that time, I could not imagine that something bad would happen. I was very optimistic by that time that we would consolidate ourselves.
And at that meeting, over the 2 to 3 hours, were you conversing, were you talking to other Lon Nol soldiers? And if you were, can you give us an impression of what you think they thought of the situation? Were they in fear, or were they optimistic like yourself? Only if you talked to them and were able to form an opinion.
The majority had the same opinion as I had. For that reason, they gathered up in order to meet with Angkar.
Thank you. Now, just to understand, did you know what was at Tulpo Tray before that meeting? Did you know of the location of Tulpo Tray? And did you know if there were any buildings or if there was any site there of note?
During that meeting, I myself did not know Tulpo Tray when it was referred to.
Was there a Lon Nol military base at Tulpo Tray?
To my knowledge, later on, very close to Tulpu Chre, there was a Lon military base.
And how many soldiers were stationed there, did you know?
In the military term, there were about 3 groups which formed one platoon. They were the avant-garde group.
And about how many people were in that group, if you can say?
There were about 30 soldiers. It was between 30 to 40 soldiers.
Now, earlier you said before the Khmer Rouge took control of Passat province, there were battlefields throughout the province before April 75. Do you know whether at Tulpo Tray, shortly before the Khmer Rouge took control, was there a battlefield there or not? If you know, or if you don't.
To my knowledge, that location was a fierce battlefield between the Khmer Rouge force and the Lunol soldiers.
And was the battle between, as far as you know, and if you don't say so, was the battle between those 30 soldiers approximately, or was it with more Lon Nol soldiers?
That Lon Nol military base was a front line point between the Lon Nol forces and the Khmer Rouge forces.
And do you know how many people were fighting on that front line before April 75? If you don't, just say so.
It was about these 3 squads who actually occupied that advanced post at that location. So then they would transmit the information through the back if there was an encroachment or advancement by the Khmer Rouge forces.
Thank you. And of the 200 or so soldiers that were at this meeting at the provincial town hall, are you able to say whether the 30 from Tulpo Tray, whether they were in attendance as well?
Please repeat your question.
You said that there were 30 soldiers based at Tulpo Tray. Did you know whether they were at the meeting at the provincial hall or not?
Yes, indeed. They attended the meeting.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to take you to your statement where you talk about the end of the meeting, and if I quote at English 00242126, Khmer 00196811 to 12, and French 00274132. You state, and you continue on from the meeting, and you state, at that time, they had the Passat provincial governor, soldiers, former civil servants, and students of Lon Nol's regime get on trucks to receive Angkor. They were transported out by 13 or 15 white vehicles, trucks, manufactured in Australia. About 500, including Mr. Prum Lahun, got into the trucks to Tulpo Tray. As it was so crowded in the trucks, they asked me to wait for the next trip. There was a fairly large number of people who missed the first trip. Now, if I can ask you a few questions about that. When your statement is read, it appears that as soon as the meeting was over, the soldiers, civil servants and students who attended at the meeting, it appears that you're saying that they got onto the trucks straight away, straight after the meeting. And yet earlier you've said that the meeting finished and it was the next day that people went back to the provincial hall and got on the trucks. Can you think clearly? I know it was a long time ago, but did people get on the trucks immediately after the meeting finished, or was there a night in between and people came back the next day? If you can't remember, just say so, but if you can clarify that, that would be helpful to the Chamber.
Through my knowledge, the meeting in order to go and receive Angkor happened separately. And regarding the events that people boarded the tracks, there was another meeting, and immediately after the meeting, people would board the tracks. And at that time, there were a lot of people, and the tracks could not accommodate all the people. And before people boarded the tracks, there was a meeting held, and they would board the track straight away after the meeting concluded. Even while the tracks were en route, there were still people who were still standing alongside the road in order to wait for the track to stop so then they could board the track. Many people wanted to go, so they rushed to board the track. And some people even ran after the tracks. I was trying to climb onto the track as well, but I was pushed off. And just let me repeat again, and before people boarded the track, there was a meeting, and people would straight away get onto the track. And those people who boarded the tracks, they packed their own meal and brought along with them.
Thank you. I think that's clearer now. So you're saying that, in fact, there were two meetings at the provincial hall, one which discussed this issue, and then shortly after, or the following day, there was another meeting, and immediately after that meeting, people got onto the trucks. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Did you go to both meetings, or just the meeting in which people left and got onto the trucks?
I attended the meeting where I tried to get onto the truck.
So to be clear, you only attended one of the two meetings, or both meetings?
The meeting that I attended first was to receive the information, and we were told about going to Tulpujeri, and then on the second meeting everyone was prepared in order to go on that trip. But we all knew about the trip from the information that we received, because we actually tried to monitor the information and the situation closely at the time.
Thank you. And from your evidence this morning, it appears that you were saying that people were very eager to get onto the trucks. They wanted to go. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You mentioned that there were about 500 people at this meeting before they got onto the trucks. About how many were left behind and missed the first trip, like yourself?
President and witness, please wait. Counsel Coupe, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the prosecutor is not representing correctly the early evidence. It seems the witness has said that the first meeting there were 500 people, and we have no idea how many people were attending at the second meeting. So we need to be very clear on what was happening at the first meeting and then what's happening at the second meeting, which is cannot be seen to be mixing it. So I think the prosecutor at this stage should be asking more open questions in respect of both meetings.
Your Honour, if I can briefly respond. I mean, the witness has said that the 500 people went to the first meeting and they came back to the second one, obviously referring to the 500. But to assist in clarity, I will clarify that as to how many people went to the second meeting and if in fact they were the same as he has testified. Mr. Sum, I think you heard that. You said at the first meeting there were 500 people, and about 200 of them were soldiers, and you knew some of them. Then at the second meeting, can you tell us whether tell us how many people attended the second meeting compared to the first?
The number of the attendees in the second meeting was no different from those people who attended the first meeting.
Thank you. You mentioned in your statement that it was so crowded in the trucks, they asked me to wait for the next trip. And there were a fairly large number of people who missed the first trip. Can you approximate how many people missed the first trip, like yourself?
I cannot give you the exact number, but a portion of the people missed the tracks, like myself. At that time, the situation was rather chaotic, so I could not figure out the exact number of the people who missed the trip.
You said that to the investigators that there were 13 or 15 trucks. About how many people did you see get on each truck, approximately, in the first trip?
From what I saw, each truck was fully loaded, and some people tried to climb onto the truck as well, but then they were pushed off.
If you can't, don't. But can you approximate how many people got on each truck? About how many?
Referring to the size of the truck, and that was the kind of trucks that were manufactured in Australia. We can work something out together. The trucks were white, and there were net on the side of the trucks, and it was a pretty large truck.
Can you, I'll try one last time, can you approximate how many people you saw got on each truck in terms of numbers?
It could be between 50 to 60 per truck.
And why do you remember in particular that they were trucks made in Australia?
I recall it clearly because those trucks were donated by Australia through the military.
Thank you. The direction, well, firstly, did you see the trucks leave the provincial hall? Did they leave singularly, or did they leave in a convoy? And which direction did they head?
On departure from the provincial town, they left in a column, and there were cheers by those people who were leaving. They traveled along Po Sata River down toward Tulpu Jray. So they did not travel one by one, but they travel in a column of vehicle.
Now, you said that you couldn't fit on the truck. I think you gave some evidence earlier this morning that you got on a truck and you got off a truck. To clarify, can you explain whether you got on one of those trucks and then got off, or were you not able to get on one of those trucks and never got on?
It was the 7th or the 8th track that I requested to get on, but then they refused and they pushed me back. They said, wait for the next car. So I actually did not mind at the time whichever track that I could get on, but every time I was refused because it was full. President, thank you, the prosecution, and thank you, Mr. Witness. We will take a 20-minute break and return at 10 to 11 to resume the questioning. Court officer, could you assist the witness during the break and have him return to the courtroom at 10 to 11. It also applies to the Judicial Council. The court is now in recess.